Next up, we're going to talk with Connor McFarland with Local Enterprise Assistance Fund.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Connor. Welcome. Thanks for being here.
Of course. Hi, Carrie. Thank you.
Hi. Yep. I'm just going to introduce you real quick.
Sure.
Connor, as I mentioned, is the development manager with LEAF, and he joined LEAF after working for the Resident-Owned Communities New Hampshire program of the New Hampshire Community Loan Fund, a CDFI, Community Development Financial Institution located in New Hampshire. There he consulted with new and existing manufactured housing park cooperatives and supported the credit portfolio analyst in monitoring the manufactured housing park portfolio. Connor earned a Bachelor of Science in Economics and a minor in Spanish at the University of New Hampshire. And again, welcome, Connor. So introduce us to LEAF. What's the purpose or the mission?
Yeah, of course. So just starting with the mission, Local Enterprise Assistance Fund, or LEAF's mission, is to promote human and economic development through increasing access to flexible and affordable financing and development services for both cooperatively owned and disadvantaged businesses. So we're most well known as a national lender for cooperative businesses. And more recently, since 2016, we've developed a few smaller place-based programs in Massachusetts, but co-ops still make up over 75% of our portfolio. And to give you an overview of like the outcomes that we seek as a community development financial institution, we are really seeking to increase access to healthy food, to increase economic inclusion, and to increase access to affordable housing. And so for our healthy food work, we are providing financing to food cooperatives from Alaska to Florida. For our economic inclusion work, we're mostly centered around worker co-op lending. And for the housing work, we've also partnered with a few different types of housing cooperatives, whether that be the mobile home park cooperatives, like where I had worked at my previous role. There, some other limited equity housing cooperatives and group equity housing cooperatives. And then the two Massachusetts-based programs that we have are the Massachusetts Food Trust Program, which is a subsidized, it's the Department of Agriculture in Massachusetts provides us with low-cost loan capital to deploy throughout the state to areas that are low income, low food access. And then we have Elevate Small Business, which is primarily focused on providing financing and TA to disadvantaged businesses in Greater Boston. And so the two Massachusetts programs still make up a pretty small portion of our portfolio. Most of our resources are dedicated to the national programs. But yeah, that's just a brief overview of kind of how our programs fit those strategic outcome areas. And yeah, thanks for having me today.
Ojan spoke a bit about cooperatives as well, but you all, the way you all are in this really critical intermediary space, supporting on the ground cooperatives by helping capital flow from different sources to these cooperatives. So why are cooperatives such an important business model, especially today?
Yeah, great question. It's funny. The more I learn about cooperatives, the more I'm learning about how different all the different types of cooperatives are. But if I could sum it up and why they are important and why intermediaries like LEAF are important to helping this cause, I'll start with co-ops. I mean, the co-ops are an important business model because they offer those solutions that are outside of the traditional markets. That allow mostly for more community control, more economic power, which really can take different shapes. So for food co-ops, for example, they're an opportunity for communities to not only strengthen their local food value chains, but they also have community ownership of a crucial part of their community's built environment. So, if a private grocer were to come into a community, they might provide benefits and increase access to affordable food or to healthy food. But the residents of that community are kind of at the whim of the private operator. So if maybe the profit margins aren't there, or volume of sales isn't sufficient, they can get up and leave that community at any point. And so, that's one angle with our food cooperative work. With worker co-ops, it's a little bit more obvious, where they provide wealth building opportunities and agency within traditional small businesses. So really, a cafe could form and structure themselves as a worker co-op, and so you have barista level employees really reaping economic benefits from the success of their business. So I think that's a pretty clear example of worker co-ops. And then with housing co-ops, I mean, Ohan discussed this briefly, and I think I've experienced this in some of my previous work, but housing co-ops really exist to preserve long-term affordability of housing. And we've seen with mobile home parks, with call it student housing, areas that are gentrifying rapidly in metropolitan areas, that the private markets are pricing out low and moderate income households of both homeownership opportunities and rental opportunities. So from those three different angles of your grocery store, the traditional small business, and the housing options in the community, there is a cooperative angle that can serve those particular needs. And I think that would be my kind of a description of why co-ops are important. And then intermediaries like Leaf, why we're important for these co-ops is that most of them are structured in a non-traditional corporate, or their corporate structure is non-traditional. And so banks will not typically finance these projects. So the housing projects, maybe there's a little more ambiguity that they might finance certain housing projects. But for worker co-ops in particular, a traditional small business lender will want a personal guarantee from the owner of that business, whereas Leaf has pretty limited guarantee requirements. And I think that is really the sweet spot for Leaf in our co-op lending. But also, Leaf is pretty well embedded into the co-op development space. And so having those types of resources available for these clients also is another step up, I think, that Leaf has from the traditional financing markets. So it's really just being willing to underwrite a deal that might look more risky on paper, but also have those development services readily available at no cost for the applicant to really dive into their business and figure out how they'll secure the financing. But that would be probably my answer on both co-ops and why intermediaries like Leaf, or how we serve them.
Great, thank you. Could you share a bit about, is it CERO? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
The CERO Cooperative, and how Leaf is supporting them or has supported them.
Of course. So yeah, CERO Cooperative is it's CERO, so Spanish for zero.
Got it.
They are an immigrant-owned worker cooperative based in Boston, and they provide so it's business-to-business services supporting food waste diversion from landfills and incinerators. And so this is actually a unique client of Leaf's over the last few years, and our impact wasn't as much on the financing side as it was on the technical assistance side with this particular project. We did make a small loan to them that's still on our books today. But what happened is that in 2018, this business was, they were trying to find a solution to their struggling balance sheet. And so our TA team kind of dove into their financial statements and had a pretty intense one-on-one TA engagement with them over a 2-year period. And our TA team's findings were that they actually had achieved really strong sales growth rates that were above industry average, and that their costs per unit had been declining since inception. So there were some really great operating trends with the business. However, they kept having truck repairs. So as you might imagine, a waste diversion firm has to invest heavily in these large, almost like a waste management truck, if you will, maybe a little smaller, but to that effect. And so it was kind of an aha moment where we realized that there was an aging fleet and that there was an ability to achieve break even if these repair costs weren't coming in every couple quarters. And so how Leaf in our TA team supported this project is that they proposed a restructure of that company or of that worker co-op's balance sheet by helping them consolidate long-term debt into more of a subordinated equity class, and then recommending more borrowing for them to buy a new truck, as you might imagine, add sales staff and an operations manager. And so essentially it's how Leaf helped that specific co-op is making available free of charge, intense one-on-one TA services. We're able to find philanthropic funders to support that work, so then we can then provide the free of charge services to an end client like Saro. And then just for one other, so that's an example of TA, but typically how our financing will support a worker co-op is during what's called the worker cooperative conversion process. And so there's a couple projects that come to mind. I'm not going to get into details, but to be vague, one was a light manufacturing, so a woodworking portion of a light manufacturing plant, where we helped the segment within the business acquire that segment from their retiring business owner. Another was a branding agency where the CEO decided to leave. They were kind of all set and ready to sell the business. And so we were able to organize that financing stack and help these these employees of the branding agency acquire that business and have with a seller's note from their former CEO. And so just to kind of the last I'll say about those worker cooperative conversions is that typically they require a combination of a cooperative developer, so just those TA type resources, many times a seller's note, so a seller of the business willing to provide flexible financing, and then also a flexible financing package from lenders like Leaf and others. Shared Capital is another lender who we are commonly working with. And so, yeah, that's an example just of Saro and how we were able to help them, but also how kind of just the basics of how many of our worker cooperative conversions have happened. So.
Great. Thanks so much, Connor.
Of course.